So this video is going to take a while to get through, so I'm going to put 2 timestamps, one for each topic, but that's all I will offer. But if you want, you're more than welcome to comment your own timestamps if you want to keep notes, so it's up to you. First of all, thank you to the people who found my videos and watched them. Thank you to the people who subscribe to the channel. It's really nice to see new faces, people coming across this channel by sheer coincidence. But hey, regardless, thank you, and I hope you all are doing well. For this video, I will put in just relatively minimal editing so that I can let the message of the video play a larger role. My hope is that if it reaches out to you in this way, it would hasten the steps toward the betterment of you and the betterment of many more. As you can tell by the title, I have 2 things that I wanted to talk about, and I guess we're gonna get into it right now. So the first thing is that I want to communicate the purpose of starting this channel. You may have seen my previous videos and they have been related to personality and cognitive types, and I've personally had this feeling that I may have led you into thinking that this is all that I'm going to talk about. And more likely than not, I will navigate through these topics in future videos. However, and I will say this now, while this channel is still in its embryonic stage, while this channel is still in its rookie year, the videos that relate to these topics will be but a portion to what this channel will be about, but it will not be its focal point. What I initially wanted this to be, and what I still want this to be, is a channel to promote self-improvement, to help promote mental health, to help you on the long journey that is being the most optimal self that you can be. I just think that in a society just coming back from a chaotic 2020 year, I think we need more channels that aim to better the overall mental health of people. Figures such as Healthy Gamer, like Infinite Waters, like Naval Ravikant, among many others, are doing just that, and I love and appreciate them for it. And as such, I would like to also be one of those channels. But my approach will be more through storytelling, through sharing weird ideas as a result of observation and reflection, through irreverent jokes that will make you laugh or cringe sometimes. But every once in a while, I will drop something like this, something more meditative, something more wholesome. And I want this to be a place where I just throw some ideas out there. And you, the person watching this, will take what you will out of it. It's like helping you help yourself, or something like that. But it's all for the sake of brightening someone's mood, or making someone feel better. Anything that will increase positivity in a world ravaged by the tragedy of yesteryear and the underlying mental health crisis, that is something that's more than worthwhile. So with all that being said, this channel will not promote drama. I am not here to have pointless arguments. I'm not here to cover the latest scandal in pop culture. I am not here to take sides. The unconscious part of me wants to say that if you don't like it, you'll have to wait in line to kiss my ass. Or, more respectfully to you, you can always leave. Like, nobody's gonna judge you for anything. I'm just here to talk about some dope ass shit about life and people. And I'm also here because I firmly believe that most people are just like, look, I just want to get through my day. Can I just sit back and listen to something that doesn't drive me nuts? I would also like to believe that I'm one of those people. So, here we are. So the second thing that I want to talk about is something I feel is more pertinent. Given that spring is just around the corner, I wanted to pay tribute to the end of winter and the remnants of a rather tumultuous 2020. And how I want to do that is talk to you about depression. And before I get into that, I want to point out that I'm not a licensed professional. One video alone will not help you completely. Many motivational videos will not help cure you completely. If you do need help, I strongly urge you to seek out a friend, seek out someone to talk to, seek out a licensed professional that will help you through this. The things I say will come from experience, and knowing that depression will affect many people in many ways and in varying magnitudes, you may or may not resonate with how I go about explaining it. Also, if I sound like I'm reading off of something, it's because I was writing for this. I figured if I were to touch upon something so fragile and yet so tense, I would want to be as precise in my words as possible. So, with that being said, let's move on. So, I have lived with depression for longer than I care to admit, but I wanted to share something that I've learned about it. Depression is a very dexterous and cunning beast. It will take on many forms, and it will occur at any time. Be it after a traumatic experience, after an extremely heated debate with a peer, after a stunning and chest-sinking betrayal, after the birth of a newborn love, after the death of a loved one, after reaching a goal and while ruminating on the next step, after a collapse of identity, even during a bright and sunny day in the summer, even at the apex of a great mood. It does not discriminate. It affects many people regardless of who you are. And just to be clear, you might be having a bad day and you call it sadness or negative emotion, and then you can come back to the rhythm of normal life. Or you might have your soul crushed under the weight of an endless noise, under the torrent of thoughts drowning out any attempt to instill positivity into your mind, because your mind is too preoccupied by the very thing that you try to stave off time and time again. I'll be the example here. At this point in my life, even when I worked out most of my internal strife, even as I consider myself a content and overall happier person, I'm still prone to episodes of depression. It's still possible for me to go through episodes of deep depression. But whatever the case may be, all these instances are there to show you how big of a situation I believe that we are in right now, how crazy of a challenge that we are going to have to push through. When the clock struck 12 to the start of 2021, everyone was praising the end of a chaotic year, myself included. Even at this moment, with everything in context, there is something to learn here. We are all magnetized to the idea of new beginnings, attracted to the freshness of a blank canvas, seduced by the idea of starting again. But a few days go by. I observe this emotional air. I take time and write pages on my journal to reflect upon this. I crystallize many thoughts into a few. And what I find is that within that moment of New Year catharsis exists a subtle tension, where people will cling to the hope of new beginnings. But once the circadian monotony of everyday life shows up once again, because it will always show up again whether we like it or not, the attachment to the fading hope and wishful thinking gives way to a hungover awakening of reality. And given that 2020 was marked by untimely deaths of beloved figures, endless protests and riots, the election, and the coronavirus, reality has become very unforgiving. It's understandable why one would want to cling to hope and is sobered by the awareness of an unforgiving reality. And did I even mention the slew of one's own personal problems that remain locked in place and yet to be resolved? I was reading Mindfulness in Plain English the other day. Bhante Gunaratana introduces the concept of impermanence and unsatisfactoriness. And my paraphrase of the two words are that nothing lasts forever, and that things will always be born, and that things will always pass away. And everything material that you will experience will eventually lose your interest, like a kid who gets tired of playing the same game over and over again. I realize that this does have a sobering implication. After all, again, we have a tendency to cling to positive emotions, hoping we will never leave them. At the same token, we are prone to repel negative emotion, avoiding them, pushing them away from entering our lives. And Gunaratana explained this as well. But every day will pass by, alternating between day and night, over time, regardless of what nomenclature of time you tack onto it. And every emotion will rise and fall, whether or not you cling to it or resist it. So how does all of that tie into depression? Well, let me tell you this story. My last episode of depression was particularly nasty. Essentially, this lasted damn near a month and some change. And while I don't want to get into too much detail about it, I do want to share what I've learned out of it, in the hope that maybe you will find this helpful too. So the first thing that happens is that a negative event will happen. This much is universally obvious. But it's amazing how, surprisingly often, this negativity will slip into your mind and lie dormant and undetected for an extremely long time, even years after the initial experience, like a virus waiting in death for its host. But anyways. So I get taken aback by the magnitude of tragedy that took place over the span of just a few weeks. And getting around it in the midst of coronavirus protocols only added to that pain. But because there were things to be done about this, and it had to be tended to immediately, I did not have the time or the space to process it. So the feeling subsides, and the feeling gives way to protocol. The feeling is suppressed. And then what happens is that the suppressed feeling pops up again. And it pops up during my downtime, and given that I was perhaps primed by the events before, I push it away again. I know all too well where this will take me if I let it in. A lot of people will agree that it's more than okay to feel sad and angry and depressed and what have you, and that it's not okay to suppress it. Well, in this instance, I've learned why it's not okay to suppress it. Because while in the physical world, once in a blue moon, a random person will say rude things to you, flash negative gestures, but at least it happens once in a while, and more likely than not, you will never see that person again in your life. Out of sight, out of mind. But in the mental world, the negative feeling that is inside you will feed off your refusal to acknowledge that it's there. And the refusal to acknowledge that it's there is in itself negative. So, following that line of reason, it just makes a lot of sense. Hell, I could even say that it's not surprising that I fell into a deep depression after that. And in the onset of the deep depression, I fight with everything to keep it at bay. But the thing is that not only will depression fight back, but in the words of Dr. K of Healthy Gamer, it will weaken your ability to fight back. You cannot do that to depression if you fight it, but it can do that to you. Notice the asymmetry there. It's kind of scary to think about. And so after the initial noise in my mind, I'm left lying in bed for a few hours at a time, even a few days at a time. I'm in a stupor. My hair greases, I'm staring at the ceiling, and my mind ceases. I'm utterly alone, and I lose sense of time. Sometimes I will get up in the afternoon and try to make up for lost time, but thinking about the futility of it sends me back to bed in another wave of depression. And I stayed in that vicious loop until I finally thought to myself, look, I can't sit here forever. I need to get the hell outside. I need to look for someone to reach out to. I need to tell someone whatever the hell is going on. I don't care if they help me out or not. I need to get this out. So I reached out to someone. I just needed to tell someone. I just needed to tell someone my story. And then what happened was the cycle back to equilibrium. And the rest was history, and it led me over to here. So in my reflection of the story, I see 4 things going on here. Ordinarily, you will go through periods of bliss and that feeling will pass. Other times you will go through misery and that feeling will pass. And as such, it's important to remind yourself every day that life operates in a kind of cycle. Negative giving way to neutral then to positive, positive giving way to neutral then to negative. I say important because depression works in a way that makes it harder for you to recognize the more positive days that invariably come around. In my depressive episode, I had this very hard time seeing the light at the end of the tunnel that has been there the whole time. It just took somebody else to help me turn around and see it. And that leads me into the second thing. You cannot get out of the depressive state alone. No amount of pleasure seeking or distraction or even self-reflection will be a substitute for someone actually being there and willing to listen. If you can do it, more power to you. But every time I tried fighting this alone, I lost. The third thing is that, with the power of some human interaction and meaningful conversation, you will slowly realize you will cycle back from negative to neutral to positive again. And the fourth thing, tying everything together, is that it will take time. This cycle will manifest itself over time, and it requires patience. It owes to the fact that everything that happened required time to manifest and disappear. You need time to inhale and exhale. You need time to experience sleep and wakefulness. You need time to experience night and day. This is no different. So let me say it again. You need time and you need patience. I mean, if you really think about it, time and patience led us to the end of the winter, right? So I'm pretty sure that if we wait a little longer, we're gonna see some trees grow and some leaves in the spring. And speaking of time and patience, I'm pretty sure yours is running thin, and I'm pretty sure more than half of you left at this point. But for the people who are still here, let me share this interesting thing that I've learned. So in Mindfulness in Plain English, Gunaratana also talks about the meaning of selflessness. But contrary to what other people think, this is not about altruism or philanthropy or any act of doing things for other people, although understanding it might imply that. It's more about the absence of the concept of I or the self. Take it a step further and you can infer that the meaning also applies to nomenclature and labels in general. I think a big part of why people feel a certain way in general is how they read into a word. And that's because they have an idea or a sensation or an emotion in the mind that comes up that ties into that word. And that implies the self that attaches to that idea or sensation or emotion. And that implies further that they have a judgment or a conclusion or an opinion about the thing that they associate with that word. It works like this. If someone expressed to you an opinion about another person that you've seen but never formally met, regardless of whether it was a positive or a negative opinion, your view of that person is already influenced, maybe even distorted. You would never know unless you actually talk to that person and see for yourself. The same can be applied for emotions. Describe an emotion as one of the many labels and adjectives given in the English language, and that's what you're going to associate the emotion with. Take away the word and its description, and all you have is the self and the essence which that word refers to. Take away the concept of self, and there is only the wordless but familiar essence and sensation. So how does that tie into depression? Well, one of the things that worked out for me in dealing with it is developing the habit of meditation. Just sitting there focusing on my breath helped me cultivate the practice of detaching myself from the label of the emotion and the self that attaches to that. But it's a hell of a lot harder than you think, and you will have to do this every day. Because when you start, if you decide to start, all you're going to have is chaos in the mind. You're going to beat yourself up for not being focused on the breath. But I will tell you this now though. While in depression, the name of the game is fighting in your mind and relentlessly beating yourself up, in meditation, the name of the game is relentlessly forgiving yourself for going off track and gently guiding yourself back to the breath. And each and every day, you will be closer and closer to developing that habit of just observing the essence or sensation of a particular emotion. It sounds incredibly abstract, but you'll understand if you decide to undertake this practice. When I started doing this, the subsequent episodes of depression were relatively much easier to get through, because I recognized it for what it really was, just a rush of emotion coming up and then fading away repeatedly, like watching clouds in the sky. Granted, I still had to go and talk to someone, but at least meditation helped me see things more calmly and buy more time. And with more time comes more choices to decide on. And with that being said, that led me to reach out to someone sooner and more decisively. So we're almost at the end of the video, but I wanted to end this video with this. I remember watching The Wire, and there's this scene where the character Bubbles, a recovering drug addict played by Andre Royo, gave a short speech in front of a support group reflecting upon his year of being clean off of drugs. And he reflects upon the death of his friend. And despite attempts to try to reach out to people and getting no answer, and despite the temptation to relapse, and despite his episodes of deep congruent depression, he never got high, and he saw through to acknowledge his happier days. You can infer that he is worthy to experience more happy days. And he ended his speech by saying this: "Ain't no shame in holding on to grief, as long as you make room for other things too." And I think that's a quote that we can all apply to ourselves and abide by. And in a scene where he says his story in front of a few people, that's got to lead you to think, well, if he can tell his story in front of willing listeners, at least I can find someone to tell mine, or I can find someone to listen to. So if there's anything to get from this video, it's that there is nothing to gain from keeping score of how much you can suppress those feelings. There is something to gain from opening up to people you trust and telling them what's going on. As cliché as it is, and whether we like it or not, we do need to support one another. Do not fight this alone. Depression was never meant to be fought alone. So yeah, please love and respect one another. Please talk to one another, and please allow for time and patience to help guide you towards happier days. I hope you all are doing well. Please take care of yourselves, okay? Please take care of others, and I shall see you in the next video.